Hello my beloved friends, and welcome back to the Untold Stories. Now I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a crazy idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the case. Right, let's get comfy and relax, and let's begin by story 1. The First Nightmare. I am Dr. Abdul Qadir, and I work in the morgue of a hospital in one of the coastal governorates. We don't usually get many difficult cases. Most deaths are due to drowning. However, I have a very important rule for myself. I must always be meticulous in my examination of every single body. I need to inspect every inch of the corpse in front of me. I focus on every little detail because something small could easily slip my mind, and that little thing might be the key to understanding the cause of death. That's why I always strive to do my work in the best possible way. 2 years ago, I was sleeping in my room at the hospital, which, by the way, is right next to the morgue. Don't ask me why. I've gotten used to it, and it doesn't bother me anymore. I woke up to the sound of my personal phone ringing. I looked at the clock, and it was 2 a.m. I thought to myself, who could be calling at this hour? Why are they in such a rush? It was Malik, a new prosecutor who had just been assigned to the area. We had worked together on a few cases before, so our relationship was fine. He said that he had received direct orders from the ministry to contact me. He needed me to check on a body that was going to arrive in a few minutes. He said he was coming with it as well. Within 10 minutes, Malik arrived with the body bag. He was accompanied by 2 soldiers, and he was scanning the morgue with his eyes. I told him not to worry, that I would take care of everything. He asked the soldiers to place the body on the autopsy table. The body was that of a man, probably around 30 years old, tall and bald. There were clear signs of gunshot wounds on the body, but there was something very odd about the way the bullets had entered. I've seen many bodies with gunshot wounds before, but this time it was different. I couldn't quite figure it out, but I had a feeling that something was wrong. I looked at Malik after the soldiers placed the body on the table. He told me it was the result of a raid and that the man had been shot while trying to attack the officers. He added, "Just focus on your work, and I'll explain everything later." I stood there for a few moments, staring at the body. Outside, the rain was pouring heavily, with thunder and lightning shaking the windows. I hesitated to even touch the body with my scalpel, but eventually, I turned to Malik and asked, "Why the rush? Why call me at 2 a.m. and come yourself? There must be something more going on here." Malik appeared to be hesitant, avoiding eye contact, and seemed reluctant to speak. After a moment, he looked at me and said, "Just finish your work. I'll explain everything afterward." He sighed deeply and added, "If you notice anything strange or need anything, I'll be right outside." I was surprised that he would stay outside the entire time. Normally, prosecutors don't wait around for the autopsy to finish. They drop off the body and leave. I asked, "You're staying out there the whole time? Why?" Malik replied, his voice calm, "It's a precaution. There are high-ranking officials involved, and they need the report as soon as possible." I didn't think much of it and began my work. The first step in an autopsy is to drain the body of blood. But when I tried to do this, no blood came out. There was nothing. The body was completely dry. I checked the equipment again, thinking maybe something was wrong. But the equipment was fine. It was as if the body had been drained of every drop of blood. At this point, I was starting to feel uneasy. The next step was to make an incision in the torso to begin examining the internal organs. I picked up the scalpel, but as soon as I held it in my hand, I had a strange feeling. It was as if something inside the body was waiting for me. I felt like I was about to do something wrong. I stared at the body's abdomen, and for a moment, it felt as though the body was watching me back. My heart started racing, and I began whispering to the corpse, "What are you hiding from me?" I had always talked to the bodies that came in. Maybe it sounds crazy, but it calms me down. It helps with the stress, especially when dealing with tough cases. But this body was different. It seemed too perfect. Its condition was fine, no signs of decomposition or extreme trauma. The skin was pale, but that was natural due to the cessation of blood flow. But then something happened. For the second time, I felt as though the eyes of the body were looking at me. I froze and stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. After all, I hadn't slept well the night before, and I was already exhausted from the day's work. I took a deep breath, lifted the scalpel, and closed my eyes for a few seconds. When I opened them again, I made a Y-shaped incision from the neck down to the abdomen. But as I opened the body, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was nothing inside. The body was completely hollow. It was as if it were an empty shell. No organs, no blood, no traces of anything. I quickly grabbed the flashlight and shined it inside. But there was nothing at all. The body was empty. At that moment, the electricity began to flicker and the light above the table started shaking. I wasn't sure if what I was seeing was real. I grabbed the handheld flashlight and shined it deeper into the body, trying to make sense of what I was witnessing. There was nothing there, not even a trace of blood or organs. I rushed out of the room and ran toward Malik, who was sitting outside smoking a cigarette, lost in thought. I called out to him, "Malik, there's something wrong. You need to come see this." Malik jumped up in shock and followed me into the morgue. I led him to the autopsy table, and I could see the fear in his eyes as he looked at the empty body. He grabbed the flashlight I had left on the table and began inspecting it, just as confused as I was. After a moment, he started sweating, his face pale. He turned to me and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't tell you everything. I should have." He then explained the man was shot during a raid. But after we received a strange call from a woman, we went to investigate. She said a man, or something, was stalking her by the sea. When we arrived, we found her torn to pieces. The man was standing over her, digging inside her with his bare hands. He continued, "We shot him, but when the medics arrived, they noticed something odd about the body. It was light, almost weightless, as if it were hollow. One of the paramedics said it felt like the man was completely empty inside." As Malik was speaking, I heard a noise. The flashlight I had left on the table fell to the ground with a loud thud. We turned to see the body, or whatever it was, moving. It was standing up. The body slowly began to move toward us, its torso still open, its empty insides exposed. The lights flickered again, and suddenly we heard a voice. It was mechanical, like a robotic sound. It said, "Thank you, thank you." Now I understand what I was missing. Malik tried to step in front of me, searching for a weapon, but before he could react, the body lunged at him. In less than a minute, Malik was on the ground, and it was clear he was dead. I couldn't comprehend what I had just witnessed. I was alone, standing in the morgue, with the body of something that shouldn't have been alive, something that shouldn't have existed in the first place. When the creature confirmed that Malik was dead, it approached me and started to lean towards me. I closed my eyes and put my hand over my face. Seconds passed, feeling like years. I opened my eyes, expecting to see it attacking me, but I found myself alone in the autopsy room. Completely alone. The creature disappeared, and Malik's body also disappeared. The only evidence of everything that happened was the pool of blood in the same spot where Malik fell. I was terrified. What was this creature, and how did it run away with Malik's body? What would it do with it? Suddenly, I heard the sound of rain and thunder increasing. When I looked at the window, I discovered that I was asleep and that everything that happened was just another dream. The next morning, I woke up to a call from the prosecutor's office. They informed me that the deputy prosecutor had been replaced. When I asked why, they told me that Malik had been killed in front of the police station and that the killer was unknown. They would send his body for an autopsy. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if it was real. This time, I couldn't stand in front of Malik's body again. I apologized for the autopsy and took a leave of absence so that I could get over what happened. But until now, I can't, and I don't know or understand whether this dream has anything to do with Malik's death or not. Now let's pass to the next nightmare. The second nightmare. The second nightmare. I am Assam, a forensic doctor. My experience may not be as great as the rest of the group, but unfortunately, I also feel that I have a problem, and this problem has been hidden all the time. It consisted of fantasies in my head, but suddenly, it turned into a dream that I saw and felt like I was seeing in reality in front of me. I have never told anyone anything, especially my dreams, but the nightmare that Abdul Kader told made me encouraged and speak because my nightmare is very, very close to his words. Let me explain so that you understand me. About 6 months ago, we all, of course, heard the news of the suicide of the famous broadcaster, Sheikh Abdul Salam. I was following the news like everyone else, and of course, a famous person like Sheikh would never be brought to the morgue of a hospital in a popular area like the one I work in. But I was still following the case and its developments, and everything that was published about Sheikh, and how his wife found him with his head wrapped in a plastic bag, and next to him, the empty Xanax strips, and also a suicide note. And of course, anyone who judges things logically will say that it is a normal suicide case, but for unknown reasons to me, I had a suspicion that the matter was not suicide, and it seems that this was not just a suspicion. I tried to reach anyone in the morgue where Shaker's body was, but unfortunately, the matter was classified as top secret. I couldn't get a single piece of information, and therefore, I had no choice but to follow the news and the things that were published on websites and talk shows, but unfortunately, this path was also blocked in front of me when they banned publication in the case. At that time, I felt very frustrated because I had a great curiosity to know anything about the case again. The next day, without any introduction, I received an official assignment that I was delegated to the case. I couldn't believe it. How and why me? I was very happy despite the tragedy of the matter, and I went and received the file of the case and was informed that I had nothing to do with all the publication and that I would perform an autopsy on the body normally, just like any other autopsy. I was surprised that all this time, the body had not been autopsied. My enthusiasm at this moment was 1,000. I put on the scrubs and gloves and started. The first thing I did was to make an incision along the chest down to the lower abdomen, and then I put the scalpel on the instrument table to start looking at the internal organs. The first thing I have to examine, as you know, is the lung, and this is to find out if the cause of death is suffocation or not. Indeed, I began to move the skin and muscles away to reach the lung, but at this moment, I felt shocked. There is nothing, and here when I say there is nothing, I mean that inside the body was completely black. You know when you enter a completely dark room with no light? The body from the inside was exactly the same shape. There is nothing but blackness, neither in the rib cage nor in the organs or anything inside except blackness. I stopped and started shaking my head and saying to myself, no, there must be something wrong. I thought that the matter was just imaginary or that I might not be seeing well. I went to the closet for the tools and started looking for the flashlight that is placed on the head. I knew that I would surely find one in the closet in front of me, and indeed, I started searching the shelves and drawers. Suddenly, everything went silent, complete silence. The matter was strange because there are always sounds in the morgue: the buzzing sound of the lamps and electricity, the sound of the refrigerators, the sound of people in the upper floors, the sounds of the employees in the same floor of the morgue. All these sounds stopped at once, or maybe I became deaf. I don't know what the reason for what is happening is, and I also don't know what the reason that made me feel that I wanted to look at the body that was on the autopsy table now. I turned my head to look, but I noticed that my head was not moving at its normal speed, as if I was moving it slowly, as if I had no control over my body. I felt that time was slow, or maybe the autopsy room had a transparent substance that made me see everything moving slowly. I don't know. Finally, I was able to look at the body, and it was exactly as I left it, the same incision along the chest and the skin that began to wrinkle due to the cut with the scalpel. Suddenly, the sounds returned again, and I was able to move at my normal speed again. I took the flashlight that was in front of me and moved towards the body while I was tying it on my head. I turned on the light and started looking again, but really, there is nothing inside the body except darkness. Even the light of the flashlight was not making any difference. I felt at that moment that I could not stand on my feet, but I had to continue. I left the rib cage and went down to the thigh area. I wanted to see if there were any tissues or not, and also, there were no tissues or any bones. There was darkness and only darkness. I approached the rib cage again and put my hand because I was doubting my eyes. I put my finger in fear, maybe I could touch any of the organs in the chest cavity, but there was no feeling. I felt at that moment a terrible coldness, as if I was touching ice. I pulled my hand quickly, but I didn't feel that my hand was being pulled at its normal speed. My hand was being pulled slowly and with difficulty, as if I had put my hand in wet sand or quicksand. And for the second time, I feel the sound stopped and time became slow. But as soon as I pulled my hand out of the rib cage, everything returned to normal again and time became normal. I jumped back from the horror of what was happening. My mind was in a state of shock. I didn't know how to think, and I didn't have any possibilities even about what was happening and how the body in front of me was in this condition and how I was not able to do anything. I went out of the morgue and stood at the door, and at that time, I saw one of my colleagues whom I hadn't seen for years. His name was Rami. Rami was standing at the door of the laboratory that was in front of the morgue. I called him and asked him to come with me. He entered the morgue with me, not understanding what was going on. I stood in front of the body and said to him, "You will understand, just look." He approached the body and his face changed. He looked at me and asked, "What is this?" "I don't know." And here I found him holding the saw and trying to open the skull. I was supposed to stop him, but I couldn't. And as I expected, the skull was also completely empty, and like the rest of the body, it was just black darkness. Rami couldn't comprehend what was happening, and without any warning, he put his hand inside the skull cavity, and suddenly, I found his hand being pulled further inside. Maybe he was the one who was pushing it in. I didn't know. Rami couldn't open his mouth. He was trying to say something that I didn't understand. His voice was coming out like a hum, a muffled sound, and I was sure from within that he was trying to tell me, "Help me." And suddenly, Rami's body also began to be pulled inside after his hand had completely disappeared inside the skull. Unfortunately, I couldn't see it from the chest. The case of Shaker Abdul Salam was closed. It was classified as suicide, and the publishing ban continued. I learned from one of my colleagues that the doctor handling the case was Dr. Rami himself. Till today, I still think about this case and that dream. Every time I think about it, I try to find an explanation, but sadly, I can't. And finally, I will let you enjoy the third nightmare. The third nightmare. The third person was Mar. The time was 8:53 p.m. I don't understand why there's such an urgency for autopsy results, but I guess it's no big deal. Let me finish and get some rest for 2 hours. The day had been long, and it was cold, and I just wanted to relax. I usually grab my phone and record my thoughts while I'm working. I used to like making lots of notes for myself, even though most of them never end up in the report, but I love hearing my own voice, especially when I speed up the recording. I don't know why, but it always amused me. I picked up the scalpel and made an incision resembling the letter Y in the chest cavity. The body in front of me was of an unknown person, probably in their late 20s. The cause of death was unknown. I worked on the body normally, but for the first time in my life, I felt completely alone in the morgue. That feeling was strange, especially since technically there were dozens of bodies around me. They were dead and lying in the refrigerators, but they were still people with stories and lives. One day, I grabbed the bone saw, and the sound was loud and it shook my hands a lot. I was pressing on the chest area to open it, and for some reason, I thought about all those horror movies where the body wakes up during the autopsy and screams at the doctor. I was sure this wouldn't happen to me because the body in front of me was definitely dead, but that feeling still haunted me. The body in front of me was perfect, no flaws. It was the body of a person who was physically fit, without any external or internal wounds. The toxicology report confirmed there were no traces of poison, drugs, or any medication. At that moment, I thought the cause of death was likely some undiagnosed heart condition, especially with the stress this person had probably gone through. That might have caused their heart to fail. But when the cause is heart-related, the heart tissue usually shows some changes, but that wasn't the case here. Everything was in its place, even the lungs looked perfectly normal, with no signs of inflammation or disease. I was still unsure what the issue could be, so I took out the heart, weighed it, and then opened it with the scalpel. I started looking through the tissues to see if anything was damaged, but strangely, the heart was completely healthy. This was a heart of someone who should have lived for at least another 50 years without any problems. The problem wasn't in the heart. Now I had to move on to the other organs in the abdominal cavity. Honestly, I hated this part of the autopsy. The smell of stomach contents and intestines was something I could never get used to. But I had to examine every inch of the intestines, which were over 6 meters long. I started my examination, and the intestines were completely clean, no lumps, no deformities. They were perfectly healthy. I asked myself, what's left? The only thing left was the brain, but unfortunately, I couldn't examine it. The morgue director called me personally and asked me to leave the brain dissection to him. It was strange because the director usually only gets involved in certain cases or those that attract media attention. For that reason, I left the brain alone and went back to examine the other organs in the abdominal cavity. I continued my examination, scrutinizing each organ, not wanting to leave anything that could possibly explain the cause of death. The director would be the one to complete the work after me. But I couldn't find anything wrong. Everything was fine. By then, I had to close the body. I returned all the organs inside, stitched the body up, and covered it with a sheet. Before I left, I took off my blood-stained gloves and threw them into the trash with the scrubs. Finally, I could go to bed and rest. I turned off the lights and walked toward the door, but then the blood froze in my veins. I couldn't move. I saw something moving. I looked and tried to convince myself that my mind was just playing tricks on me. Maybe I was exhausted or just wanted to sleep. But no. When I looked again, I saw the body sitting up on the bed. The mouth of the body was open as if it wanted to scream, and there was an intense pain visible in its eyes. Of course, the reason for that was clear. The body's chest was open, and none of its organs were in place. I collapsed in shock, terrified, asking myself, what is this I'm seeing? The body tried to move, got off the bed, but couldn't stand. The stitches torn near the abdomen, and the intestines spilled out of the body. The body stretched out its arms as if asking for help, but I froze. I couldn't move. I was sitting on the floor in a state of shock, not knowing what to do. I was sure this was a dead person. There was no way they could be alive after what I did in the autopsy. How could this person still be moving? After a moment of shock, I started to calm down and was able to move. The man was lying in front of me, his organs exposed. I stood up and walked toward him, picked him up, and placed him back on the autopsy table. It was clear he was trying to speak, but couldn't. I tried to calm him down, left him where he was because I was afraid the stitches would come apart and all the organs would fall out of his body. I said, "Don't worry, I'll help you. Just try not to move." He sat in front of me, and I had my hand on his neck, trying to feel a pulse. I couldn't feel anything, no pulse, not even a breath. I was certain that all his organs were destroyed. I was sure that the person in front of me was just a corpse. But he was sitting in front of me, alive. A million thoughts raced through my head, but the only question I could ask was, what happened to you? The man, or rather, the body in front of me, couldn't speak. I ran to the technician's desk in the autopsy room, grabbed some white paper and a pen, and rushed back to the body. I wrote in big letters, "Dead," and put a question mark next to it. The question was strange, and I didn't know what to do but shake my head. I said, "I'm sorry, I was just trying to figure out who killed you." He grabbed the paper and wrote again, "Get up," in a space with black marks. The sentence was simple but strange, written in childlike handwriting. I didn't know if this was because of oxygen deprivation or if he had always written like that. I realized then that the cause of death was a heart attack, just like I had expected, even though it didn't show in the autopsy. I asked him, "Do you know where you are?" He shook his head. Then he looked at his body, saw the incision, placed his hand where his heart should be, and tried to feel for a heartbeat. Of course, there was nothing. He wrote again, "What is this?" I replied, "I was performing your autopsy." He wrote again, "I don't want to go back." I asked, "What do you mean?" He wrote, "The place there is bad." Black day. My whole body shook, and a flood of questions exploded in my mind. What did he mean? Where had he been? I asked him, "Where is this bad place?" Suddenly, his eyes filled with fear. He grabbed the pen and started writing a lot, filling up page after page, describing the place he had been. I was terrified by what was happening, unsure whether I really wanted to know what he wrote. I took the paper from his hands, asked, "How long were you there?" He wrote a number. This translation captures the essence of the story, from the autopsy and eerie events to the chilling mystery surrounding the body's movements. The mood is tense, and the unsettling atmosphere. I didn't know how I could help him. He was dead. If I gave him painkillers, they wouldn't even move in his body. There was no circulatory system for the medicine to travel through, and no intestines to absorb it. I tried to get him to lie back on the autopsy table. I looked back at the papers he had written, and I spent hours sitting on the floor reading them. He was in front of me, suffering silently, paper after paper, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. Tears were falling from my eyes from the fear, and my heart was shaking with terror. Suddenly, I couldn't control myself. I grabbed the scalpel and ran toward him, stabbing him in every part of his body, shouting, "I'm sorry, I can't let people know the truth. I can't leave you here." I screamed and screamed, saying this, until my wife woke me up from my sleep. For a while, I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream and that none of this had really happened. But the problem didn't stop there. The issue was that my wife was terrified by my appearance, my words, and my screaming. She insisted that I either promise to get treatment or that we separate. That's why I joined this group, hoping that you might help me and ease my pain. That's all. This was just a brief overview of the nightmares that forensic pathologists might face. Honestly, these are nightmares I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies. I want to thank Lamia Shaheen very much, and I want to thank you all for staying with me until the end. If you like the forensic pathology and autopsy episodes, you can leave us your feedback in the comments. Don't forget to like, because likes are important. Don't forget to subscribe, because subscribing is even more important. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you can get all the important updates of The Morgue is Brought to Life.